Tonight's story starts with a woman who arrived with the legal power to take everything. A king who had already buried one love in his own territory and decided that was enough for a lifetime. And a pack that started protecting her before she told them her name. She came to write a verdict. She didn't know she was already the evidence. Let's begin. The road to Varen territory took 3 days by horse. Sarah made it in 2. She wasn't running from anything. She simply didn't stop unless she had to, and she had learned, over 11 years of arbitration work, that arriving before anyone expected you told you more about a place than anything they would choose to show you on purpose. She had a case file in her stole bag. A dead merchant. A body found 3 miles inside pack territory with no witnesses, and a wound the human coroner had called consistent with wolf attack. A treaty clause that said, if a pack is found responsible for the death of a human on their claimed land, the territorial rights revert. It was clean. Clear. She'd handled more complicated cases in a single season. She hadn't expected the wolves at the border. Not guards. Not a formal greeting party. Just 3 wolves at the tree line, 200 meters before the official boundary marker, watching her come down the road. They weren't blocking her. They weren't threatening. They were simply there, still and watching, the way animals watched something they hadn't decided about yet. She slowed her horse to a walk. The one in the center, a woman, dark-eyed, steady, stepped forward. Her head dropped before Sarah had pulled her horse to a stop. Not a bow. Something lower. Something involuntary. Sarah had worked with packs for 11 years. She had never seen that. She filed it, the way she filed everything, and kept riding. The Varen stronghold was built into the side of a ridge, stone and old timber, older than the treaty by at least 2 centuries. The yard inside the gate was wide and cold. The morning mist hadn't lifted. Sarah dismounted without waiting for assistance, handed her reins to the stable hand who appeared, and walked toward the main entrance with her case file under her arm. The yard was full. Not performing full. Working full. Wolves carrying loads, moving timber, working at a forge glowing red on the far side of the yard. Ordinary. Until she was halfway across the open ground and one of them, a man with a split log under each arm, stopped completely still. Set the logs down. Lowered his head. Then the woman at the water trough. Then the pair near the forge. Then, in a wave that moved outward from where she walked, one by one, every wolf in the yard went still and dipped their chin toward the ground. Not coordinated. Not performed. The opposite of coordinated, each one as they noticed her, like a reflex they hadn't agreed to. Sarah kept walking. She counted 37 before she reached the door. She did not let her pace change. She was shown to a room on the 2nd floor. Plain but clean. A window facing the ridge. She set her case file on the table and opened it before she unpacked anything else. She was still reading when the knock came. She opened the door. The man in the doorway was tall, broad through the chest, with the kind of stillness that didn't come from calm so much as from very long practice at looking calm. His hair was dark with gray at the temples. His eyes were a color she didn't have a precise word for. Not gray. Not green. Something in between that changed depending on where the light was. "You're the arbiter," he said. She looked at him. "I'm going to need access to the site where the body was found, the coroner's notes from your territory's examination, and a list of every wolf who was near the eastern boundary in the week before the discovery." A pause. His expression didn't change. "You didn't answer." "I didn't hear a question. I heard a statement about what I am." She held his gaze. "You know who I am. I know who you are. We can skip the part where we confirm it." Something shifted in his face. Almost nothing. Just a fraction of pressure releasing from the jaw. "I'll have what you need by morning," he said. "I need it by tonight." He looked at her for a moment longer than was strictly conversational. Then he said, "Tonight," and left. She closed the door. She stood there for 2 seconds, which was longer than she usually stood anywhere doing nothing. Then she went back to the case file. His name was Kale Varen. She had known that from the file. What the file hadn't told her was 8 years of holding a territory that 3 neighboring packs had tried to take during the war. The mate he'd named in his 2nd year as king. Buried in his fourth. The 2 seasons after her death, where the pack held together through something the treaty observers had described in their notes, with visible uncertainty, as sheer force of his presence. She learned all of it from the pack. Not from asking. From watching. 11 years of arbitration had taught her that the way a pack moved around their king told you more than any document. They didn't give Kale wide berth out of fear. They moved around him the way water moved around stone. Because he was there. Because he'd been there. Because whatever shape this pack had taken had formed itself around the fact of him. She was on the site by noon. The eastern boundary was a wide meadow broken by a creek and a stand of old pine. The body had been found at the edge of the tree line. She walked the ground slowly, case notes in hand. The thing was. The angle didn't work. She was still working it through when she heard the footstep behind her and turned. Kale was 6 feet away. He hadn't made a sound. "You followed me," she said. "I came to the site." A pause. "You happened to already be here." She looked at him. He looked back. "Did you know him?" "Corvin Hay." "No." "Did anyone in your pack know him?" "Not that I've found." She turned back to the tree line. "The angle doesn't work. If a wolf came from that tree line at the angle indicated by the wound, the body would have landed here." She took 3 paces left. "Not there." She pointed at where the coroner's marker had been. "Your coroner's notes say the body was found there." He was quiet. She turned. "You knew that?" "Yes." "How long?" "Since I read the coroner's report." He paused. 6 weeks ago. "You filed a denial. You didn't file a counterreport." "A counterreport requires evidence of what actually happened." He met her eyes. "I don't have it. But I don't think it was my wolves." She looked at the meadow. At the ridge above it. At the sky going grey. "Then what do you think happened?" His jaw was tight. "I think Corvin Hay was dead before he reached this meadow. I think someone moved the body. I think they chose this boundary because a wound like that, and a location like this, points to one answer before anyone looks closely enough to find another." She was quiet for a moment. "You're saying someone framed your pack?" "I'm saying the evidence invites that reading." She closed her notebook. "I'll need those coroner's notes tonight. All of them. Including the pages your beater pulled before submitting to the treaty office." His expression didn't change. "You knew about those." The page numbering skipped. She met his eyes. "I notice things." She walked back toward the stronghold. He stood in the meadow and watched her go. The coroner's notes confirmed it. She read them at the table in her room by lamplight. The pulled pages weren't damning. They were the opposite. They showed the wound was inconsistent with an attack that started at the tree line. That the blood evidence suggested dragging, not falling. That the true origin point was somewhere deeper in the trees that no one had gone back to measure. Someone had pulled those pages not to hide guilt. To hide the evidence of innocence. Because if it wasn't the pack, then someone had gone to very deliberate trouble to make it look like it was. And the only parties with the motive and the means were the ones who wanted Varen territory. She sat back. She thought about the 3 packs that had tried to take this land during the war. She thought about the 2 arbiters who had recused themselves before her assignment. She had not asked why. She was beginning to think she should have asked. She picked up her pen and kept writing. She didn't see him the next day. She saw everyone else. The beater, Rhea, precise, careful, watching Sarah the way someone watched a fire they were responsible for, not afraid, just aware. The pack healer, whose original notes matched nothing in the official report. 3 boundary wolves whose accounts agreed in every detail that couldn't have been coordinated in advance. And everywhere she went, the pack kept doing it. Not just bowing anymore. Positioning. She walked down a corridor and a wolf she'd never spoken to stepped ahead of her to the corner. Not leading. Just there. Between her and whatever was around the bend. She crossed the yard at dusk and 2 wolves fell into step at a distance behind her. Not following. Present. She sat at the evening table and the wolves around her arranged themselves, without discussion, so that her back was never to an empty space. She documented all of it. She documented everything. On the second evening, She knocked on the door of Kale's working room. He opened it. "Your pack is guarding me," she said. "Did you order it?" He stepped back from the doorway. She walked in. The room was spare: a desk, maps, a fire, books with broken spines. "No," he said. "Do they know they're doing it?" "Some of them. And the rest?" "The rest are doing what they feel." She turned to face him fully. "Why?" It was not quite a question. She already had the shape of an answer. She wanted to hear what shape he gave it. He looked at her for a long moment. The firelight caught the angles of his face differently than daylight had. He looked tired, not exhausted. Just carrying something heavy at a pace he'd long since stopped measuring. "There's a word in pack language," he said. "Nereth. It doesn't translate cleanly. The closest is something between anchor and home. A presence the pack's instinct recognizes as part of itself." He paused. "It isn't common." She waited. "The bond isn't mine to explain to you," he said. "You came here to determine fact. I won't muddy your judgment with something you didn't sign up to navigate." "That's very careful of you." Her voice was even. "It's also not your decision." She didn't move. "I've been documenting wolves positioning themselves between me and doors since I arrived. 37 bows in the first courtyard crossing. A wolf stepped ahead of me at a blind corner this morning because something in her body told her to. I didn't come here blind, Kale. I came for the truth about a dead man. But the evidence I keep finding isn't only about him." She held his gaze. "And I want you to tell me why." The room was very quiet. He looked at her for a long time. His hands were at his sides. Still, not passive, just decided. "Because you're mine," he said. Simply. Precisely. The way he said things that had been weighed until they couldn't be made any shorter. Not a claim. A fact delivered carefully, against his own apparent preference. She held it. "How long have you known?" "Since before the gate. The bond doesn't wait for introduction." He paused. "You were half a day out when I knew something had changed. And you didn't tell me." "No." He met her eyes. "You came with authority over my territory and my pack's survival. Telling you would have looked like manipulation. Not telling you felt dishonest." A long breath. "I chose to let the facts find you on their own." She was quiet for a moment. "And the verdict? You understand what I'm weighing?" "Yes. If I rule in your favor, I look compromised. If I recuse myself, the case goes to Arbiter Dunfield," he said, "who has ruled against 3 packs in the last 2 years. In territories that were subsequently absorbed by Harren." She stared at him. "Harren? One of the 3 packs that had tried to take this land during the war." "You know," she said. "I've known for 4 weeks." He looked at the fire. "I couldn't present it without it looking self-serving. I needed someone neutral to find it." She sat down in the chair across from his desk without being invited. Saturday. The fire settled. "Tell me about Harren," she said. "Everything." He told her. She listened, and wrote, and did not think about the word Nereth or the way the pack moved around her or the fact that this man had handed her the full architecture of the thing that could save his territory and simply trusted her to know what to do with it. She thought about it later. Alone. For a long time. She found the evidence on the 8th day. Not in the stronghold. On the Merchant Road, 3 miles west, in a hollow beneath a lightning-split oak that someone had searched before her and not searched carefully enough. A travel ledger. Corvin Hayes, by the initials. She read it in the field with her back to the tree. Corvin Hay had not been a merchant. He had been a courier carrying documentation of a forged land transfer, a treaty addendum that would have given Harren a legal claim to the western section of Varen territory. He had been killed because he was about to find out the debt he'd been sent to collect was fabricated. His body had been placed at the Varen border because a dead human, the right wound, the right location, was the cleanest way to void a treaty without ever touching it directly. She sat in the cold and held the ledger. She thought, I was assigned this case because the other 2 arbiters refused it. Because they knew what it was. She thought, I know exactly what I have to do. And exactly what it will cost. She went to him that night. She found him on the wall walk above the south gate. Looking out at the dark ridge the way she imagined he'd been looking at things for 8 years, present, unrelenting, refusing to stop watching. She stopped beside him. Held out the ledger. He looked at it. Then at her. "I'm going to write the verdict tonight," she said. "I'm going to rule the pack not responsible and submit a formal complaint implicating Harren in both the death and the forgery. I'm naming you a material witness to evidence of bad faith on 3 counts. She paused. "It's the correct ruling. The evidence is unambiguous." He said nothing. "When I submit this," she said, "every treaty board in this region is going to say I was compromised. That the bond got to me. That I couldn't rule objectively." He still said nothing. She turned to look at him. She wanted him to say something. She was rarely in a position of wanting that from anyone. "I need to know it costs you something," she said. "Not just me. You. Because I'm about to put my name on a ruling that will follow me for the rest of my career, and I'm doing it because it's right, not because of the bond, but I need you to." She stopped. He had turned to face her. The ridge light was thin and flat. His eyes were doing the thing where the color shifted. "I know," he said. He said it like he'd been saying her name long before he'd said it out loud. "It costs me everything," he said. "If the board questions the ruling, my credibility in every future treaty process is tied to yours. If they decide you were compromised, they'd void the verdict." "Yes." She looked out at the ridge. Far below, the wolves were still working. She could see the forge light. "Then they can try," she said. Silence. Long and cold and full of wind. "What do you want?" he asked. "Not from the case. Not from the ruling. You. What do you want?" She thought about 11 years of arriving places early and leaving before she'd settled in. She thought about the hollow at the bottom of her chest that she'd stopped feeling as absence and started feeling as shape. She thought about 37 wolves bowing in a courtyard because something in them had recognized something before she had. She turned to look at him. "I want to stop arriving places and already calculating when I'll leave," she said. He looked at her for a long time. Then he said, carefully, the way he said everything that mattered, "Then don't leave." 2 words. No ornament. Precise. She felt something in her chest do what it had been doing at the edges for 8 days, settle. Go quiet and solid. The way a door sounds when it finally closes the way it was built to. She submitted the verdict in the morning. She did not recuse herself. She signed it with her full credentials, sealed it with her arbiter's mark, and gave it to the treaty courier before the second bell. Then she found Rhea and told her she needed a room that wasn't temporary. Rhea looked at her for a moment. The head drop came slow and deliberate. Not reflex. Chosen. "Follow me," she said. The pack naming came 4 days later. Not a ceremony she had been prepared for. Less formal than she'd expected. More witnessed. The entire pack in the main hall, those who couldn't fit standing in the corridor beyond, the sound of breathing in the room the loudest thing in it. Kale stood at the front. She stood beside him. Not across from him. Beside him. Because she had asked for it. "I'm not a subject to be named," she'd said the night before. "I'll stand next to you or I won't stand at all." He had said, the corner of his mouth moving in that fraction of a way, "Next to me." Rhea spoke the formal words. The pack law clause. The witnessing requirement. Then Kale turned to face her. He was looking at her the way he'd been looking at her since the first day, something careful and examined behind it that she had been slowly, over 10 days, watching learn how to be less careful. "I name Sarah as my mate," he said. "Under pack law, before this pack. Not because the bond required it. Because she stood in this territory for 10 days with the power to end it, and chose instead to protect it." He paused. "And because she told me not to spend my life waiting for her to leave." She felt the room exhale. Not dramatically. Not all at once. A slow release, like a tide going out, 30, 40 people letting go of breath they'd been holding without knowing, the pack's body settling into something it had recognized before anyone had said it out loud. She turned to face him. "I'm going to be difficult," she said quietly, "just for him." "I know." He said it like he didn't mind. I take notes on everything. I will investigate you. I'd expect nothing less. The corner of his mouth. Just barely. She reached up and took his face in her hands. He went very still. She thought it might be the first time someone had done that. She thought she had years of mornings to find out. I see you, she said. Not the king. Not the territory. You. Do you understand? Something in him opened. Just slightly. Just enough. Yes, he said. Low. Certain. She kissed him. The pack made the sound that rooms make when everything that should have happened finally does. The treaty board questioned the ruling. Of course they did. Sarah appeared before them alone. She laid out the ledger, the mismarked coroner's pages, the forged debt documentation, the testimony of 3 independent witnesses she had found and interviewed in the weeks after submitting the verdict, and a 40-page brief that addressed every possible claim of compromise so precisely that the board chair, at the end of it, said nothing for 11 seconds. The ruling was upheld. Harren was sanctioned. The 2 arbiters who had recused themselves were quietly reviewed. Sarah walked out of the treaty building into bright cold morning and stood on the steps and breathed. Behind her, footsteps. She didn't turn. She knew the sound of them now. Kale stood beside her. He had come without being asked. She hadn't asked him to come, and he had come. And she had learned, in 4 weeks, that this was simply how he was. He showed up for things. Well, he said. She looked at the city spread below the steps. She had worked cases here 4 times over 11 years. She had never stayed longer than the work required. I want breakfast, she said. The corner of his mouth. She took his hand. They went to get breakfast. And that's where we leave them. A woman who spent 11 years arriving places and calculating the exit before she'd unpacked. And a king who had buried what he loved in his own territory and quietly decided that was the last time he would name anything. She made him say it out loud in front of 40 witnesses on a cold morning anyway. He showed up to the treaty board without being asked. They are going to be fine. They are going to be so much more than fine. I need to know, Team Sarah, or did Kale take the whole story for you? Because that man stood outside that case for 4 weeks, handed her every piece of evidence that could save him, and trusted her to know what to do with it. Without asking her to. Without making it a condition of anything. That is the detail I need you to sit with. Drop it in the comments. And if this one stayed with you, share it with someone who needs a story about a woman who stops running and a man who finally stops bracing. It helps more than you know. I'll see you in the next one.